So the great thing about this podcast today is we have Cynthia J. MacKay. What does the J stand for, Cynthia?
Johnson, that was my maiden name.
Brilliant. And Cynthia, you're a doctor, right? I mean, do you say these days I'm a retired doctor, or does that even retire doctors? It must last for life, right?
Well, I say I'm a retired eye surgeon, which is a bit more specific, just to really
and a bit more
impress
glamorous as well, right?
people. Darn right.
Well, you've earned it. You've earned it, of course. What's the difference between an eye doctor and an eye surgeon?
Well, there are ophthalmologists that actually do surgery and are trained as doctors.
Yeah.
And then there are optometrists that are trained to give out contact lenses and give you glasses. And then there are opticians, which give you the glasses and make you the glasses. So it's a bit confusing. People they don't know quite what I do, but if I say eye surgeon, then they picture me slicing up their eyes, and they know.
I got you. That sounds a bit gory. So that explains the MD at the end of your name rather than PhD or something else. Am I right?
Right. If I were an optometrist, I'd be an OD.
You'd be an OD.
That's the or a nutritionist, I'd be an ND.
Got
So
you.
I went
And
all
is
the way
that,
through 4 years. I went
Brilliant.
all the way
and
through
is that
4 years.
worldwide, Cynthia? Is that across the world, or is it specific to the US, or does every country have the same letters?
Well, I think in the UK, don't you have a difference between surgeons and non-surgeons? One's called Mr. and the other's called Doctor.
Or Mrs. of course.
I'm not sure
or Miss.
quite how it works.
Yeah. Although I've not seen some of the other suffixes. So an ND, for instance, I did see a PD, which I think is Doctor of Psychology or something, maybe.
PhD.
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 Yeah. Although
Anyway,
the
that's
Anyway, that's for the others. That's for the others. So. Cynthia, where are you now? Where in the people listening to this? I'm in Scotland. That you can probably tell by my tartan. Where are you?
I'm in Rye, New York, which is a suburb of New York, north, on the water on Long Island Sound. A lovely place to live. I came to Rye because of a guy. Way back in 2003.
Wow. So I'll tell you. So for the British people that listen to this one day, they will never forgive me if I don't ask you what the weather is like out there today.
Ooh, it's about 33 degrees and bright and sunny and windy. Are you worse in Scotland?
Nice. So you're talking Fahrenheit, right? We are 9 degrees centigrade, and it is actually quite bright out there, and it's not raining for once, which is unusual.
Ah.
And did you grow up in New Jersey? Were you? Are you where you started life?
I started in Far Hills, New Jersey, which is quite an extraordinary place. The people there are very rich. They live in great big houses with long, long driveways, and out in front of the driveways is a little sign that says the name of the house. It never says the name of the person or the address. It's the name of the house.
Wow.
And social life revolved around fox hunting, the Essex foxhounds. It was crucial to Far Hills, New Jersey.
And how do you feel the same about fox hunting now as you did then, or and how is that? How do you feel about it?
Well, I fox hunted because it was a way of pleasing my grandfather. My grandfather made a lot of money, and he built a great big house on a hill, And then he had 4 sons, and he built 4 other houses for the sons around the big house on the hill. And that was so his sons could not escape and go live somewhere else. And he loved fox hunting. He adored it. Actually, fox hunted all over England and Ireland, too. And the best way to please my grandfather was to fox hunt. And I hated fox hunting. I was terrified when I was fox hunting. I had a horse he'd bought for me. He was a great guy for making a deal. And he probably got a very good deal on this retired racehorse called Briar Time. And she'd never been trained to jump. And that's what you do when you fox hunt. You dash across the country after a fox, and you leap over fences, except she would often plow through fences instead of jumping. I don't know why I'm alive today.
And what's your earliest memory of that? Can you place that in your, before you're 10, or was it later memories you have?
So my earliest memory is of lying in my crib in my bedroom, and there was light dappling the floor, and my nurse had put me down for a nap. My parents never came to my bedroom. It was always the nurses. And I started to pick off the wallpaper on the wall. It was ivy covered wallpaper, and I hated it. So I decided I was going to get every little scrap off. So I started picking it off with my fingernails, bit by bit by bit by bit by bit. I was determined I would get it off, and I would have if they hadn't moved me to another bedroom. So I guess at that time, you could see that I was a child with a certain obsessive compulsive personality, or a lot of persistence. And I love projects, and I love working hard, and that's what I did during my nap time.
So the description you've given so far, one might be mistaken to think, would you say a privileged childhood?
Oh, more than privileged, I would say. Super privileged. We had a nurse, and we had a cook, and they're the ones who raised us. We never saw our parents. We ate with the nurse and the cook in the kitchen. Way before my father came home, he commuted into New York City back and forth every day to work at the Kellogg Company, which my grandfather had helped to found. And when he came home, my mother would dress for dinner in a long gown, and they would be served a candlelight dinner with our German cook bringing in the food, and we would have been put to bed by our nurses. We used to wait up for him in our little chairs at the top of the stairs, and we'd wait until Daddy got home. That was the exciting moment of the day, and then we'd fly downstairs, jump into his arms, and he'd give us a kiss apiece, and that was it.
Yeah,
and the weekends
no doubt you got plenty of presents, right? Plenty of gifts he would bring you home.
Well, I would say the gift I really wanted, of course, from both my parents was their attention and approval. And I fought all my life to get it. I practically never saw my mother. She was a very beautiful woman. She had 31 proposals of marriage. If you'd known her, Andy, you might well have been 32. And she was a very talented artist. She was a portrait painter. And she spent her time in her studio, and my father spent his time either working or cutting brush, and in the evenings they went out to their black tie dinner parties. And I saw my parents so little that when I started to talk, I had a heavy German accent because the only person I spoke to was my
your-
German nurse.
So is that? I guess that continued because you then went to boarding school, right? How old were you?
Absolutely. Worst 3 years of my life.
Come on, you got up to some
Gotta go
no
to
good
boarding
there. There must be some story to tell. There must be some naughty Cynthia story that went on in boarding school. What happened?
Oh, I wouldn't have dared to be naughty, Andy. I was too obsessed with gaining my parents' attention and acceptance and my pleasing my grandfather, and I kept my head down and I studied. And the
Yeah.
big bright spot of boarding school was the biology course I took in senior year. That was the best part of boarding school. It was St. Timothy's School in Stevenson, Maryland.
And how far is that
And
from
my
home?
mother had. I'm sorry?
How far is that from home, Maryland? So your parents at this time were living in Far Hills.
Oh, I think it probably would be a 5 or 6 hour drive, something like that.
Wow, okay.
And we were definitely packed away there. We couldn't go home on the weekends, and we were only allowed to leave the buildings to take a walk down the driveway, which they called walking the lane. If we signed out beforehand and took another girl with us and signed out after we got back. That'll give you an idea of how closely we were supervised.
Wow.
So
Look, some of that was difficult to hear, but I have no doubt it inspired you for what came next. And let's not pretend that I started this talking about you being a doctor, a surgeon, a professor. We haven't even mentioned that you're a professor, and you have a whole host and heap of awards that keep coming your way. So I want to start to understand. Well, the inspiration sounds like this biology course that you took in boarding school. Am I wrong?
Well, that
So you
was a
becoming
big
a surgeon.
factor. But it started way before then. When I was about, let's say 7 or 8 or 9, I was walking down the road next to my house. It's called Holland Road, with my nurse and my younger sister and my even younger brother. And I saw a turtle by the side of the road. It had been struck by a car, and its shell was cracked open. And inside, there were all these wonders, these incredible yellow loops and this purple bag and these foamy pink structures. And I was fascinated. And really, that's the moment when I decided I wanted to find out the name of all these things and what they did, how they worked, and how they could be fixed if they got broken. So I had the biology thought way, way back. That's really when I started thinking of becoming a surgeon, fixing people, helping people, because my mother used to put me in charge of my younger siblings, and she also was very dependent on me to help her out in all kinds of different ways.
Yeah.
So I got used to taking care of people. You know, doctors are overwhelmingly first children. I don't know if you knew that. It's because they've had the experience of taking care of younger siblings.
That's
and they
amazing.
get used to
No, I
that.
didn't.
They like it.
I'm going to fact check that. That is fantastic, and remind anybody listening to that in our next podcast that we do, we will definitely follow up on. I'm intrigued to see how we can get. But what's something that's even more important now is that our listeners could be forgiven for thinking, so what? Cynthia, MacKay, yeah, she became a doctor, a surgeon, a professor. But you didn't do that today. You started that, what, 40, 50 years ago, perhaps, in the 70s. How difficult was that as a woman in those days? What challenges were you facing?
Well, it was very difficult for women to get into medical school in my day, particularly if they were older and particularly if they had children. And when I applied to medical school, I didn't go right after college. I applied when I had a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old, and when I was 30. And the interviews at the medical schools didn't go well. One man said to me, "Well, Mrs. MacKay, so you want to be a doctor. Just who is going to take care of your 2 young children while you are off being a doctor?" That was one question, and another man looked at me and said, "We don't take anybody over the age of 28. And another man said, "If you were a man with the grades and the scores that you have, we'd certainly admit you, but you're a woman, and women always leave." So,
Oh, right.
I was very lucky. There was one medical school willing to take me on. I'm very grateful to it.
Yeah.
And they've just given me their honor award this last year, actually.
One of many honor awards that I've seen. And talk through most of us won't understand. So here you are. You're at medical school, and what moved you in the direction of ophthalmology?
Well, I fell in love with the eye when I was a sophomore at Harvard. And I can tell you the exact moment. I was sitting in the dark lecture hall. I remember it was fall. I remember the leaves outside. And in walked Professor George Wald, who later would win the Nobel Prize for his work discovering how the retina worked. And the room went dark, and this first slide flashed up on the screen. And it was a cross-section of the eye. And I was riveted, absolutely riveted. I'd never seen anything more fascinating. And he started explaining how it worked, and the light came in through the cornea and was focused by that and by the lens, and it went to the retina. And then there were all these little nerve fibers that brought it up to the back of the brain where you actually saw. And right after the lecture, I walked up to one of the assistants standing by the wall, and I asked him if I could work in his lab. He was working in Professor Wald's lab, and it was a man called John Dowling, and I worked with him for 3 years and wrote my thesis under him. So I've been interested specifically in the eye since 1961.
Yeah. And I mean, would you say it's a particularly complicated area over some other areas that you could have chosen?
Well, the eye actually is part of the brain. The nerve going down to the eye, the optic nerve, is a tract of the brain. And when the little fetus is developing inside the womb, there are 2 little cups that bulge out from its head, and each cup turns into an eye. So the neurology of it is fascinating.
Yeah.
Very high percentage of the nerves that go into and out of the brain have to do with the eye and the movements of the eye. And making someone able to see again, or preventing somebody from going blind, there's no thrill greater than that. You can see the difference it makes to their lives, these people.
I can imagine, but that's only one part of becoming a good doctor, a good surgeon, right? You know, how were you with patients? Did you like patients? Were you a kind, caring, soft, warm person, or one of these doctors that we see on the TV that are quite dismissive and no bed manner?
Well, I hope I wasn't like that. I loved my patients. I got so much from them. And it was fun getting to know them. You could tell so much by their body language when they walked into your office. Were they happy or sad? Were they cringing as if they were afraid? Were they anxious? Then you wouldn't believe what people tell you if you listen to them. My patients would tell me things they hadn't even told their spouses. And that is a huge part of the satisfaction of being a doctor. And I think today, when the visits are so rushed and you're allowed 15 minutes for a patient, patients who really believe their doctors and think they're on their side will follow their orders. They'll take the medicines or have the surgery. And a physician that really knows their patients gets so much more gratification than someone who doesn't. As a very big cause of burnout is just running through patients as if they were cars on an assembly line. It's very sad. As a matter of fact, my own physician has started a empathy project for medical students to teach them to be empathetic towards their patients, and that's amazing. So important.
Yeah, hey, look, at my age and all of our age, we've all experienced doctors, good, bad, and the ugly. It's very warming to hear that and heartening. Tell me something. If you were looking at a young Cynthia today, with the challenges that you faced in the 70s and the new world that we are here now with social media and the internet at our hands and generative AI and all of these other tools, and you're a young Cynthia, a young woman making this decision, what will you tell those people, those young Cynthias, the ladies that want to come into this this hard fought out competitive industry?
Well, first I would tell them they're badly needed, because several studies have shown that women are better surgeons than men. And I wish I'd known that when I was thinking about going to medical school, because one of the things that I worried about was whether I had the skills to be a good surgeon. What does it take to be a good surgeon? Where do you get the guts to cut into a human eye? And the women are better than the men because they're more meticulous. They take a little more time, and they don't get sloppy because they realize the stakes. So first of all, I would say they're needed. Second of all, I'd say it's an incredibly rewarding field. When you see how a patient's life changes when a dense cataract comes out, and they're able to do things now they never were able to do before, what could be better than that? And I'm not gonna lie, it's long and it's difficult, exhausting, but you can do it if you have persistence, persistence, and persistence. It's like picking off wallpaper. You take it a day at a time, and you never stop.
And then you eventually get sent to boarding school. So, do you think women today face as significant challenges as you did? Do you think they're lesser or greater or just different?
Well, I think that the acceptance of women in medicine has rocketed up. I mean, my first day in the operating room consisted of walking into the nurses' changing room. There were 3 changing rooms at the hospital up in the operating floor. One was for the attending surgeons, the older doctors. One was for the residents, the male residents. And one was for the nurses. And I was the 4th female resident at the Harkness Eye Institute of Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center. And the 4th woman, and the Harkness Eye Institute was founded in 1930, and I was number 4. So I walk into the nurses' changing room, and there's the head nurse of the OR, Robbie, who was once, excuse me, an Army nurse. And she looks me up and down as if I was a fly she wanted to swat, and she says, "Never did think much of women surgeons." So that was a gauntlet she threw down. I had to prove myself to Robbie. Yeah. So I changed into my scrubs and trotted into the operating room, and I walk in, and there's the surgeon I'm assigned to assist. And he looks at me and he says, "Lord, save me. They've sent me one of those damn women."
Okay, so that's pretty impactful. So you won in every 10 years between 1930 and 1970. I can imagine if we were to look at 1970 to 2020, we must see significantly higher numbers. It has to have significantly changed.
Well, Andy, actually, there are more women entering medical schools now than men. It's about 51% to 49%. So the percentage of women in medicine is going to go up, hopefully, especially in the surgical areas, and it's even higher in the law schools. It's becoming a female profession, which is good because women are caring, and it's a caring profession.
We say hooray to that, right? So
hooray to that.
You touched on it just slightly a moment ago, the advancement in ophthalmology since you've been involved. Is it, if you were studying, say, in the 1970s, I can imagine things have changed dramatically. What one thing would you say, if it's possible, is that sticks in your mind that is an advancement for greater good?
Well, ophthalmologists were the pioneers in using small incision surgery. The first time I operated on an eye, I made an incision that cut the cornea half off, because I had to have a big incision to pull out the cloudy cataract, which is the lens that clouds up. Now, when I was doing cataract surgery a few years ago, I went through an incision that was 2.5 millimeters wide. That's 2.5 pinheads. And actually, other professions are now following, other surgical professions. In the old days, if you had a hysterectomy or a gallbladder or something, there'd be a big scar right down your middle. Yeah. And now there's probably 2 tiny little scars on the side where they slipped in some kind of a scope and did it laparoscopically.
An appendix is a big proof of that, right? You know, I mean, appendix surgeries now are very rarely anything other than a keyhole.
Yeah. And with the small incision surgery, there were many advantages. You didn't need to put in stitches, right, because you had a self-sealing incision. You went into the cornea, about halfway with your diamond blade knife, then you went through the middle of the cornea, and then you went down again. So you created a flap, and the miniature knife got out. It slapped shut. So that doesn't have any stitches necessary to hold it together. And you
reduces infection, does it? Chance of infection, I guess.
It reduces the chance of infection. You don't have these ugly, difficult, scratchy, big stitches like little thorns in your eyes. You don't get astigmatism. Back in the old days with those huge incisions, if you didn't sew the wound up properly, the incision would sag down, and then you get a cornea shaped like half a football instead of like half of a basketball. In other words, you'd have what we call astigmatism, a misshaped cornea. So it had many advantages, including less infection.
And look, it's an incredible world of eye surgery, and I imagine there's much positive to say. But your life, or certainly the last decades of your life, have been involved in a campaign against probably what some people would say are some of your peers doing a surgery that you're not so happy with, and this is the work that you're involved with in LASIK. How did you become involved in LASIK, and where did it start, and how did you uncover this nasty practice?
Well, I was there the day LASIK was born. It was invented.
What is
well,
it?
LASIK is a cosmetic, unnecessary, elective surgery to change the shape of the cornea, which changes its focus, which eliminates the need for distance glasses. In other words, it's not done to make you see better. As a matter of fact, all eyes see worse after LASIK surgery. It's done so you can get rid of glasses. And if you've ever had a chunk of dirt in your eye, you know how that bothers you.
Yeah.
Now imagine it wasn't just in one spot, but it was all over both of your corneas. That's the kind of pain people get after LASIK. They call it dry eye, but it's actually due to the fact that all the nerves have been cut as you reshape the cornea. Cornea has more nerve endings than any other part of the body, which it needs so that you can blink quickly when something comes near. And imagine what it's like to have all those massacred cut nerves. They never heal. This chronic inflammation in the eye for the rest of your life. And of course you've thinned the eye, which the cornea is now much thinner than it used to be, so it can bulge out. It's not strong. You've got scar tissue as it heals, an irregular cornea. It's a bloody disaster. And
so why do they do it? Why do they do it, Cynthia?
I'm sorry, Andy. What did you say?
Why do they do it? If it's causing this damage? And I guess you would say the only safe vision correction is eyeglasses,
or
right?
contacts.
Or contacts. Okay.
Well, I'm a surgeon, and for 40 years I operated on eyes. 40 years. And every time I operated on an eye, I had to get the patient's consent. And I had to certify in the chart CARB, C-A-R-B. I had told them the complications, the alternate possible therapies, the risks, and the benefits.
Yeah.
And the patients are not told about the risks. In particular, they are not told the percentages of the risks. And a new study came out this year showing that 75%, 3/4, 3 out of every 4 people who have LASIK have dry eye, a new dry eye afterwards. If that was in the consent form, I understand that I have a 75% risk of dry eye that is untreatable and permanent. They wouldn't want it. They're not informed adequately. The consent forms are a joke. And the surgeons are either not reading the literature, which is inexcusable, or else they are reading the literature, which is even worse, and they're lying. So it's a very big public health hazard, because one of the things it does is to give you incredible halos and dazzle and glare in dim light. And that means we are driving down roads at nighttime where people are coming at us who've had LASIK surgery, and instead of seeing our 2 headlights, they see 20 headlights all over the place. And as a matter of fact, there was a very fine young man called Tillerson who served in Iraq, and he was shot by a member of an American soldier, by a member of his squad who just had LASIK and couldn't see him.
Oh, wow.
It's terrible. And 40 million people around the world have had LASIK. 20 million in the United States. And the complication rate is 30%. So 12 million people around the world have this distorted vision, disability, inability to see at night. It's a nightmare.
So, Cynthia, if there's a 30% complication rate, does that mean that there's a 70% success rate?
Well, you have to understand that these eyes are sick now. They started out healthy eyes that just needed glasses, like my eyes, and then they had the LASIK surgery, and now they're sick.
Yeah.
And what I did for 40 years of operating on eyes was to take sick eyes and make them healthy. There are many complications that don't show up right away, like this chronic neuropathic pain, which will lead to which will and has led to suicide. Out of an 8,000 person LASIK support group on Facebook, at least 40 people have committed suicide. So these complications start to turn up later on. And I mean, there are people, I know some of them, who had LASIK 20 years ago and they're still happy, but they're lucky, because after 7 years, 44% of these eyes have regressed. They've either gone back to being nearsighted, or they've gone the other way and become farsighted. So if you truly understood all the adverse complications to having LASIK, you wouldn't go near it. And I'm the only ophthalmologist that will speak up. I've tried and tried and tried. I've talked to the 2 foremost ophthalmologists in the U.S. who treat LASIK complications. They spend their days helping these desperate people who are suicidal and whose lives have been wrecked. And I said, would you say anything for our book? Would you say, we've got to do a better job explaining the complications? And they refused to do it. It's a mass delusion. It's like concussions causing brain damage. We just didn't believe it, even though the evidence was there.
So you make an interesting point. You doctors are generally a closed shop, right? You stick together and through thick and thin, and you're outspoken. You have clearly achieved as a surgeon and in life. how are your peers, even fellow optometrists that are not doing this surgery? How are those people reacting to you, speaking out against this?
Well, all I get is criticism. People think I must be making money for this, but I'm losing money hand over fist. And they criticize me. And of course, we've written a book, The Unsightly Truth of Laser Vision Correction. You thought up the fabulous title. It's got 11 pages. 11 pages at the back of the book of citations from the scientific literature. 11 pages proving every point we make. Yeah. And I thought when we came out with the book that the LASIK surgeons would go berserk and sue us. I was worried about that, but they haven't, and I think I don't want to put ideas in their head, but it's possible they don't want to bring attention to it.
Yeah,
it's
like
the code of silence.
Yeah.
It's like omerta, the code of silence that the mafia have.
Yes.
You break the code of silence and you get killed. I honestly thought they would try and bust my knees or something, but they've been pretty restrained. In the older days, I would get these critical letters, and I belong to an ophthalmology group, a scientific study group, and after a New York Times article came out that I had helped to engineer, and I was quoted in it, that criticized LASIK, they wrote letters of criticism to the head of the society. We don't want this name in our lovely all-male society. So it's
this club.
It's
of
a
theirs,
truth,
right?
They're a little club. Yes, precisely. Yeah. They're a profitable little club.
But they're not the only people guilty here, are they? You have the surgeons, of course, and many other people covering this stuff up. But what about the FDA? Surely they have a role here. And how have they come about to license this stuff?
Well, let me show you something. This is the book that you've been so helpful in getting to press. This man here, Morris Waxler, was chairman of the FDA committee that approved LASIK. And after he retired from the FDA, he started to see all these patients who were just in misery, in terrible shape. And he went back to the original statistics that had been given to the FDA, and he found there was a 70% chance of fluctuating vision and a 40% chance of dry eye. And the LASIK surgeons had reassured him that these were temporary and would go away, and he discovered that they were permanent. So he's turned against them. And the other people on this book, Ed Boschnick is an optometrist who treats LASIK-damaged patients with scleral lenses, and Paula Kofer is a LASIK-damaged patient herself, who's been very influential in trying to stop this.
She has a victims support group, right? Paula Kofer is... Yeah, and what is that? Can you remember what the group is called and how people could look at that?
It's called the LASIK Complications Support Group, and you just go on Facebook and there it is. She's also got a website, and 10 Reasons Not to Have LASIK, And she's doing her best, and I'm doing my best, and Morris Waxler is doing his best. It's just a matter of getting the truth out. It's the truth, and the truth will out eventually.
And it's the unsightly truth, right? So we have the unsightly truth, which you have co-authored. You are an executive producer of the film Broken Eyes, and you have...
Yes.
I mean, you really are coming in at a pincer movement here. You have your memoir, which does talk about your fantastic achievements and your early days, but it does have a serious note. You know, it does deal with this problem, and you've got, as far as I see it, you have this young woman who grew up in a super privileged life, but had pretty much been abandoned by her parents, sent off to boarding school, not given the love and care, devoted her life to caring for others, and this incredible sadness at the work that you do and have done for good. There are people in your industry that are doing the exact opposite.
That's very well said, Andy. Whenever I hear the word LASIK, my stomach goes into a knot. It's unbelievable. Where the LASIK surgery, which is ruining sight and ruining eyes and ruining lives, is against everything that we believe in as surgeons.
And you have a code, right? Do you not have a code to... Is it the Hippocratic Oath? Is that what they call it?
When you graduate from medical school, you all stand up and you promise to do no harm. And you will always consider the benefit of the patient. And of course, Hippocrates lived a long time ago, so this tradition goes back a long way.
Yeah.
And this is a blatant, shocking, horrifying betrayal of the Hippocratic Oath.
Yeah. And it's sad to hear, and it's sad to see it in your face. And before we finish, I'm going to go back to your personal life, but I do want to talk. I do want to talk about how you became involved in Broken Eyes, because that's a movie, a documentary that's been released. It almost looks like a Cannes Film Festival type documentary, and I think it will probably achieve that accolade. How did you get involved in something like that?
Well, those of us who work in LASIK advocacy are a feisty but small group. And if anybody contacts me about a LASIK article, say, in a newspaper or a video, I always tell Morris and Paula and Ed Boschnick. As a matter of fact, last week I was interviewed by a woman who's an editor and writer at Woman's Health, and I immediately told them about it. So I can't remember, I think it was probably Paula found out that Dana Conway was going to do this movie. She told me about it, and Dana contacted me and wanted to interview me because I can give the scientific background for why it's inevitable that this procedure will cause all these problems. And they needed money, and that's how I became the executive producer. And I appear in the film a dozen times at moments to introduce various different complications of LASIK. She's an extraordinary woman. She's young, she's beautiful, she's blonde, and she had LASIK maybe 5 or 6 years ago. She's in constant pain. She has blood drawn, her own blood drawn once a month and made into eye drops that she has to put in every hour to deal with her pain. She has fluctuating vision. She goes blind at night. So she has to do all her filming during the months of the year that have the most sunlight. And despite all this, she fought her way into making this film. And one of the most extraordinary things, when I flew up to Boston to be interviewed for the movie, she told me that the two cameramen who came with her had volunteered their services.
Wow.
They were doing it for free. They were doing it for her. They thought so much about her.
Yeah.
The movie's really good. It will be released soon on PBS, and it's won a lot of awards. It won Best Documentary Award in Dubai International Film Festival. It won Best Documentary and Best Female Director at the Soho Film Festival. It's won other awards. It's got a few more film festivals to go, and then it will be released. Broken Eyes, remember that name.
Broken Eyes, definitely. And so we have the energy that you have is unbelievable. You the unsightly truth, the Broken Eyes, which you have been part of, and whilst doing all of this, you have written an impressive memoir. And it's not a memoir that's 200 pages long. This is a memoir that's over 400 pages, or around about that number. I think we may have squeezed it down now with some cheating. But where on earth do you get the energy? Is the energy this fight for LASIK, or is this just this little girl that peeled the wallpaper off and is just full of energy and full of zest? Is that just the story?
Well, Persistence is my middle name, and I wanted to tell this story. Because when I was applying to medical school, I looked for a book to tell me, what is it like to be a surgeon? What happens when you're in the operating room? How do you face it? How do you do it? And I looked and looked, and I couldn't find this book, and so I wrote it. And I hope it gives a clear picture of what lies ahead for anybody who wants to do such a crazy thing.
Yeah.
But then I wanted to show that it was not only possible, but fun along the way.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
and you do this with great care and great attention and great energy, but you faced so much, happiness and sadness in your life. And one of the things that reading the book that I reflect on is your relationship with Warren, and just to share a few thoughts about who Warren is and something funny and how you've dealt with the loss of Warren. That would be nice to hear.
Oh, sure. So I was married for 39 years to Malcolm MacKay, who has wonderful qualities. He was very instrumental in getting me to go to medical school. I couldn't have gotten through it without his help. But in the end, he just needed a different woman. He needed someone who wasn't so full of energy and who wasn't so, accomplished, or he wanted somebody to focus on him. He wanted a different woman. I was an apple and he wanted a peach. So he left. And 6 weeks after we separated, I put an ad in Harvard Magazine and ended up with Warren Joseph Keegan, who was a business professor who had gone to Harvard Business School. And what a sweetheart he was. From Kansas, simplest of backgrounds. His father left school after the 8th grade to work on the family farm. He'd never read a book except for comics and Boy Scout manuals until he went to college. I mean, talk about a self-made man. And such a great sense of humor, and he loved motorcycles, and we went all over the world on his motorcycle. We went all around
Did he wear
the
something like
South
this on his
Island.
head? Did he wear something that looked like this?
No, he wore something that was much thicker and much stronger. He wore a helmet that had a little device in it that meant he could talk to me, and I was wearing my helmet. And
Wow.
we had a blast. We went the south along this great ocean road of Australia. We went all around the west. We went to West Texas. We went to the Grand Tetons. We just had a ball on the motorcycle. And
And I can see that in your smile.
yes,
You cannot take that away. It's so rich, and then you lost him, of course.
he got metastatic bladder cancer. He was a very heavy smoker before he met me, and boy, I got him the best care available in the world at Memorial Sloan Kettering. I pulled out every chip in my chip box, but it wasn't enough. He died in the end of 2014. We had 11 years together, and then he died, which was, of course, very difficult to get over. Grief's very hard, and it stays and stays.
Yeah.
So.
And you live with it. You live with it.
You have to live with it. But then, a friend of his also from Harvard Business School, lost his wife, Nancy, Arthur Stampelman, 5 weeks after Warren died, and we helped each other out, and one thing led to another. And now I'm married to Arthur.
Lucky Arthur.
Going to darling Arthur, and going to services at the synagogue, and lighting Hanukkah candles, and it was a big surprise. I never thought I'd marry again, but I did.
And how does Arthur cope with all of this work that you are doing at a stage in your life where you shouldn't be doing all this work and spending the time with him, traveling the world?
He's got a lot of interests of his own. He's a docent at the Bruce Museum. He has lots of friends. He's in New York at the moment having lunch with a bunch of his Citibank friends. And he's happy to tag along when I go pick up an award and take the photographs. He read the entire memoir over 3 times. That gives you an idea of how devoted he is.
That does. It's interesting. Yeah. Well, look, listening to you, seeing you when you're happy, seeing you when you're sad, which there's been this podcast has been more smiles than it has been sadness. But you're full of energy. But there's no denying. Denying that age has to have an effect, an impact on us. But you seem to be deciding not to let age get in the way. How are you dealing with coming to an age as you are?
Well, lots of exercise. But I just feel I'm 82 and I have no idea when I'm going to go, but it isn't going to be very far from
Not
now.
yet.
And so I just want to do something with my life, and it isn't working on my golf game. It's such a privilege to have a cause and
Yes.
to be able to do something that really will help the world. I mean, if we can stop LASIK, think of all the misery and suffering and disability that will end. And I feel lucky that I have that cause. not happy about the cause and the reason for it, but I mean,
Yeah.
it's been a privilege.
It's amazing to hear you close like that, because when I think of the start of this call, I cannot get the image away of this adventurous child peeling off the wallpaper, a whole life ahead of her, you know, achieved a lot as a woman undergraduate, you know, and then going on to be married, have children, and then embark upon this amazing life. And yet, at the end, we close with this one big fight, and it's to stop this awful, awful practice of LASIK. It shows how much of an impact. You know, you're not talking about wanting to peel that wallpaper off again. You're not talking about wanting to relive some of the glory that you've probably had. You want to stop this god-awful practice, and that is just amazing to hear.
Well, I feel lucky that I have some money to put into it, actually. I mean, I certainly am not going to solve the problem of climate change, but I do know where to put my money where it will definitely do a lot of good, and that is to caring for LASIK damaged patients and to prevent patients from getting LASIK. So it's been a privilege, really, and I feel very well. The
Yeah. So
There's so many
the question I
things
should
we
have asked
do
is
to
what
save
not
sight.
to do, and the answer would have been:
We take out
do not
cataracts. We fix
embark upon
retinas
LASIK
that have
surgery.
detached.
Just
We
do not do
fix glaucoma, control glaucoma.
Okay, so it's been
There's treatment now for macular,
Yeah.
wet macular degeneration. We've made
Yeah.
so
Look,
many
it's been an
strides
absolute pleasure.
in so many
This-
ways in
this has been a
ophthalmology. And we
great,
can help people so
discussion.
much with
It's
so
been
many
full of
diseases.
real
I've had
cheerful memories
cataract
and
surgery
a lot of
myself,
hard work.
and
I'm
boy, I
very
never
privileged
realized
to
how
have been able
important
to
it
have
was
this
until I
conversation with
did.
you. If you stay on
And-
after I press this button, we'll have a chat.
But you shouldn't mess with the eyes for cosmetic reasons. I mean, if you have a boob job and your nipple is a little bit out of place, then your nipple is a little bit out of place. But you have cosmetic surgery on your eyes, and so all of a sudden you can't see and you can't work and you're in terrible pain, and the consequences are terrible. So I would say ophthalmology does enormous amounts of good to its patients. LASIK is the one exception. Oh, yes. Learn a little bit about it. Learn a little bit about it and you won't go near it. Okay.